It was a little past 1 in the morning when the streets of downtown Dallas felt more like cold metal than pavement, the kind that made every step echo like you were someplace you didn't belong. I was kneeling on the sidewalk in front of the Commerce Tower, fingers numb, trying to tie the broken wire that held my shoe together. The night air cut through my hoodie, but I barely noticed it. All I could see was the frayed lace, the peeling sole, the dark spot where the cardboard inside showed through. Tomorrow was the biggest marathon in the state, the one I had trained months for, and here I was fighting with a shoe that should have been thrown out years ago. As I tugged the wire tight, a black SUV slid to the curb like a shark gliding into shallow water. Its glossy paint reflected every neon sign around us, and before I could even process it, a security guard rushed toward me. He grabbed my shoulder, shoved me up against the cold wall of the building, and barked, "Step away from the vehicle." My hands shot up instinctively. I didn't even think. I could feel people turning to stare the way they do when they see trouble they think they already understand. A woman clutching a shopping bag took one look at me and muttered, "Of course. They always target expensive cars." They. I'd heard that word my whole life. "I'm just fixing my shoes," I said, trying not to sound scared. But the guard didn't even hear me. He pressed harder, his radio crackling as he spoke into it. "Possible suspect. Looks suspicious. Stay alert." My heart pounded. I'd done nothing wrong. I'd touched nothing. I'd only knelt down to tie my shoes. But none of that mattered. Not the truth. Not the context. Not me. Another guard approached, standing just close enough to block any chance of escape, though I wasn't going anywhere. His eyes scanned me from head to toe, lingering on the holes in my shoes, the stains on my hoodie, the fact that I was a black kid alone in the wrong part of town at night. He didn't say anything, but his silence screamed judgment louder than any accusation. People slowed down as they passed, watching, like a scene was unfolding for their entertainment. A man shook his head in disappointment. A couple pulled their daughter closer. I swallowed hard. Shame burned in my throat. After a tense moment, the first guard finally stepped back. Clearly disappointed he didn't have a real criminal to deal with. He jerked his chin toward the street. "Move. Now." I nodded and backed away, my hands still slightly raised because even when the danger passes, the fear takes longer to leave. When they turned away, I crouched to grab the cheap plastic water bottle I had dropped during the commotion. As I picked it up, I heard a dry, amused laugh behind me. "Maybe try stealing better shoes next time." The voice belonged to a boy my age, maybe a little older, dressed in sleek athletic gear with a race jacket zipped to his chin. He smirked as he passed the kind of smirk only someone who had never worried about money in his entire life could wear. He didn't know. My name didn't know anything about me, but he thought he knew enough. I didn't answer. I turned away, gripping the bottle so hard it crinkled under my hand. My chest felt tight, like the whole night was pressing down on me. The wind carried the smell of car exhaust and fried food from a late-night diner, but none of it grounded me. All I could think about was how small I felt, how familiar this feeling was, how tired I was of always being mistaken for someone I wasn't. I kept walking, head down the city lights, smearing into blurs beside me. Every step reminded me of the race coming in a few hours and how different the world would look for the runners lined up beside me. They'd show up with brand-name shoes, bright outfits, fresh gear, hydration packs, coaches and families cheering from the barricades. And then there would be me, the kid from the trailer park whose shoes barely held together, the one who worked late shifts stocking shelves, the one who knew what it meant to run not for glory, but for survival. The guards didn't know that. The boy in the expensive jacket didn't know that. None of the people staring at me knew that. Tomorrow, I would stand among runners whose lives looked nothing like mine. But tonight, in this moment, I was just a poor kid in the wrong place trying to tie a broken shoe without being treated like a criminal. As I reached the end of the block, I stopped under a flickering streetlight and looked down at my shoes again. The wire held, but barely. I exhaled slowly, letting the cold air sting my lungs. I reminded myself why I was doing this, why I kept running even when the world kept trying to convince me I had no right to stand on the same starting line as everyone else. Because running is the only place where I'm not judged before I move. Because when I run, no one can decide who I am but me. I took another breath, steadied myself, and stepped back into the darkness. Tomorrow, I would run in the biggest race of my life. But tonight, the city made sure I remembered exactly where I came from and exactly how the world saw me. Just a poor kid who didn't belong. I walked on anyway, because the race hadn't even begun. I grew up in a part of Dallas people only remember when they need a statistic or a reason to lock their car doors. My world was a narrow strip of cracked pavement, rusted fences, and trailers packed so close together that you could hear someone cough 3 homes away. I was 17, but felt older most days, the kind of older that comes from carrying worries you never asked for. My mother worked 2 jobs, one at a motel where the sheets were never as clean as the ads claimed, and another at a small diner off the highway where truckers left tips that barely paid for her bus rides. She would come home long after midnight smelling like onions and bleach, her hands cracked from detergent, still trying to smile, so my little sister would not notice how tired she was. My father used to be a mechanic, one of the best in our neighborhood, but after the garage closed and never reopened, he drifted between odd jobs, most of them temporary, all of them draining. Some mornings he left before sunrise, telling us he had something lined up, but he often returned carrying nothing but frustration and the kind of silence you learn not to question. My sister Maya had asthma so bad that even climbing into the top bunk made her wheeze. On good days, she could laugh without coughing. On bad days, she curled up on the couch with a blanket and asked when we would buy more medicine, even though she already knew the answer. We always needed more money. That was the baseline of our lives. The electricity bill arrived like a threat. Groceries were a puzzle we never solved. My sneakers were held together by speaker wire and hope. Still, I had one thing that felt like mine: running. I did it before school, after work, whenever I could steal a moment alone. Not because I wanted to be anyone special, but because when I ran, the world fell away and I could finally breathe. Out there, no one cared what shoes I wore or what neighborhood I came from. It was the only time I did not feel poor. People in the trailer park called me the kid who never stops moving. It was half joke, half observation, but there was truth in it. Moving felt like the only way to keep the weight from crushing me. I delivered newspapers before dawn, riding my rusty bike, until the chains squeaked loud enough to wake the neighborhood dogs. After school, I stacked shelves at a corner store where the manager watched me like I had pockets stitched from shadows. Every time I walked past the counter, the little security mirror followed me. Once, a customer said loudly that they should check my bag before I left because kids like me were always taking things. I had nothing in my bag except a smashed peanut butter sandwich, but I stayed quiet. Silence was easier. Being poor teaches you that explanations rarely matter. At school, the rich kids called me Goodwill because of my clothes. They laughed at my shoes, my frayed backpack, my lunch packed in a reused bread bag. They joked loud enough for me to hear. Some days it stung, some days it barely registered. The thing about being humiliated often is that eventually your skin thickens in strange places. Mr. Allen was the one person who saw something in me. He was my gym teacher, graying hair, soft voice, and the patience of someone who had lived enough life to understand hardship. He saw me run one morning before class and asked if I had ever considered taking it seriously. I told him I could not. I had work, responsibilities, a family relying on me. He nodded like he understood, and maybe he did. Still, he showed up twice a week to time my laps with an old stopwatch that clicked louder than it should. He never pushed, but his presence alone felt like belief. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that lets you borrow confidence until you can afford your own. Even then, other teachers whispered that he was giving me false hope. They thought I was wasting time chasing something I could never reach. But Mr. Allen simply said that hope was not cruelty if someone was willing to put in the work. My family never discouraged me from running, but they did not understand why I spent so much time doing something that did not pay bills. My mother once said gently, "Running will not put food on this table, Jordan. Wishing will not fix this life." I knew she was right, but running made me feel like there was something out there beyond the narrow lines of our neighborhood. Something I could chase that did not require money or permission. That feeling kept me going through nights when the trailer walls rattled from shouting neighbors and through mornings when my father stared at the floor instead of eating breakfast. The night before the marathon, I sat outside on the steps of our trailer listening to the sounds of our street. Dogs barking, a baby crying in the distance, a car engine misfiring, the familiar soundtrack of our neighborhood. I looked at my shoes, patched and tired, and wondered if belief alone could keep them together one more day. I imagined the starting line, the crowd, the runners in gear I could never afford, and me standing there like an outsider someone forgot to remove. But I held on to one truth. When I run, I do not owe anyone an explanation for who I am. Running is the only place I get to choose my own direction, and tomorrow, even if the whole world doubted me, I would show up anyway, because sometimes showing up is the bravest thing a poor kid can do. The night before the marathon felt heavier than any night I could remember. The sky over Dallas hung low and dark, the kind of gray that made the streetlights flicker and buzz like they were tired too. I had just finished a long shift at the corner store, my back aching from stacking crates, my fingers stiff from unloading boxes in the cold. The manager had kept me 2 extra hours because Luis, the evening cashier, called in sick again. I did not complain. I never did. Extra hours meant a few more dollars, and in my family, every dollar had a destination long before it landed in our hands. By the time I stepped outside, the wind cut through my hoodie like it was made of paper. I started jogging home partly to stay warm, partly because running always eased the weight in my chest. My breath was shaky, not from exhaustion, but from the pressure of what tomorrow meant. The marathon was supposed to be my moment, maybe the first moment in my life where I did not feel like the world expected me to fail. But life never cared much about timing. When I turned onto our street, I saw my mother sitting on the steps of our trailer with her head in her hands. A single porch light flickered above her, casting long shadows across her shoulders. I froze. My mother never sat outside like that unless something was wrong. When she looked up, her eyes were puffy and red. She held an envelope in one hand and her phone in the other. She tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "The pharmacy called," she said quietly. "Maya's inhaler prescription needs to be refilled. They will not release it until we pay the balance from last month." I felt the ground shift under me. "How much is it?" She handed me the paper. More than either of us had. I stared at the number and felt my throat tighten. The last refill had already been on a payment plan. This one needed to be paid up front. I told her I could pick up an extra shift after the marathon, but she shook her head. She reached into her bag and pulled out our EBT card. It kept declining. Something is wrong with the system. Or maybe we just ran out and I did not notice. I could hear the shame in her voice the way she blamed herself, even though none of this was her fault. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, but the words felt too thin. When we stepped inside, the trailer smelled like damp blankets and worry. My father was sitting on the small couch, holding Maya against his chest as she tried to breathe through short, strained gasps. She was not in a full asthma attack yet, but she was close. Too close. Her little hands shook as she clutched his shirt. Her inhaler was empty. She had used the last puff an hour ago. She whispered my name when she saw me. It came out like a plea. I knelt beside her and tried to comfort her, pretending not to feel the rising panic clawing at my stomach. "We need that medicine," my mother said. "Tonight." I grabbed my wallet even though I already knew what was inside. $17 in wrinkled bills, some change, a grocery receipt. My race bib, folded and worn at the edges, poked out from the side pocket. It felt ridiculous suddenly. The idea of running tomorrow. The idea that a marathon could matter when my sister was gasping for air. My father put a hand on my shoulder. His voice was soft and afraid. "We will figure it out." I nodded because I did not know what else to do, but inside everything cracked at once. I walked outside and stood at the edge of the street staring at the sky like it might give me an answer. The cold made my hands numb. My breath fogged in front of me. I felt like screaming. Instead, I closed my eyes. That was when it happened. A sudden explosion of shattering glass. I turned just in time to see a liquor bottle smash against the side of our trailer. A man 2 lots down stumbled forward, drunk and angry, yelling at no one and everyone. "Keep your trash kids quiet. Some of us work in the morning." He hurled another bottle that landed near my feet. It rolled dripping alcohol across the pavement. The sound of breaking glass echoed down the street. My father stepped outside, but I held out my hand to signal him to stay back. Confrontations in our neighborhood always ended badly. The drunk man staggered, muttered another slur, then stumbled back to his porch. I watched him disappear inside and felt something inside me snap. Not loudly, quietly, like a thread finally breaking after being pulled too tight for too long. I looked at our battered trailer, at the broken bottle glistening near my shoes, at the porch light flickering above the doorway, and at my mother holding Maya in the darkness behind the screen door. And I understood something with a clarity that hurt. I was not running the marathon tomorrow to win. I was running because the world had already decided I did not belong in places where winners stood. I was running because everything in my life told me I was supposed to stay in the dirt, to stay small, to stay quiet. I was running to prove something to myself, not to them. Tomorrow was supposed to be my one chance to step out of the shadow of this life, even if just for a moment. But tonight, everything felt heavier, colder, more impossible. My hands shook as I wrapped my arms around myself and whispered, barely audible, I have to keep running, even if no one sees it, even if no one claps, because if I stop now, I am letting them decide who I am. I stood there until the cold bit through my clothes, until my breath steadied, until the fear settled into something sharper, something like determination. That night, everything collapsed around me, but somewhere inside that collapse, something else was beginning. Morning came colder than expected, a thin layer of frost clinging to the grass as if the world wanted to remind me that nothing about this race would be easy. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Maya gasping on the couch, my mother's trembling hands, the shattered bottle glinting on the pavement. But I still woke before the alarm pulled on my hoodie and stepped outside into that quiet gray stillness where even the wind felt like it was holding its breath. The marathon registration area was set up near the Dallas Convention Center. Bright banners flapped in the breeze, volunteers in matching jackets handed out race packets, and the whole place buzzed with the kind of energy that made people believe in possibility. I stood alone in a line of runners who looked like they had stepped out of magazine ads. One kid stretched his legs wearing compression sleeves that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Another adjusted a smartwatch that could track oxygen levels, heart rate, distance, pace, hydration, and maybe even his hopes and dreams for all I knew. They chatted easily with each other, laughing, comparing strategies. I hugged my arms into my chest, trying not to shiver, trying not to let anyone see how small I felt. When I reached the front of the table, the volunteer scanned my name. She glanced up at me hesitant, almost like she wondered if I was standing in the right line. I gave a polite nod, pretending not to notice. She handed me my bib and safety pins without smiling. I thanked her anyway. As I stepped aside, I nearly collided with an older man who seemed to appear out of nowhere. He was thin, not fragile exactly, but worn in a way that suggested the world had not been kind to him. His clothes were simple, the kind you see on people who spend their days repairing things or walking long distances. His shoes were scuffed brown leather, clearly not meant for running. A weathered camera hung from his neck, the kind used by people who collect memories rather than take selfies. He held a small bottle of water in one hand. His fingers shook slightly, as if the cold bit deeper for him than the rest of us. When the bottle slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the pavement, I bent down immediately and picked it up. He looked surprised, almost startled, like he did not expect anyone to notice him, let alone help. "Thank you, son," he said softly. His voice was steady but carried a kind of loneliness that settled deep into the air between us. I handed him the water. "Are you taking pictures for the marathon?" He smiled faintly. "Something like that." There was something strange about the way he said it, something quiet and watchful. But then a group of runners walked by, laughing loudly, completely ignoring him as if he were part of the background. The old man stepped aside, almost shrinking into himself. I knew that feeling too well. Before I could say anything else, he gave a small nod, turned, and disappeared into the crowd with surprising speed for someone who walked with a slight limp. I watched him go, not sure why I felt drawn to him. Maybe because he looked like someone life kept pushing aside. Maybe because helping him reminded me that I was still human in a world that kept trying to reduce me to the labels other people slapped on me. Maybe because for a fleeting second when he looked at me, I felt seen in a way I had not felt in a long time. But the moment passed quickly. I pinned my race bib onto my shirt, trying to smooth out the creases. My hands shook not just from the cold. All around me, runners moved with confidence and certainty. They had entourages, coaches, bags full of snacks and supplements, people rubbing their shoulders like they were professional athletes. I felt like an imposter in worn-out shoes and a thrift store hoodie. I headed toward the warm-up area. That was when Bryce and his friends showed up laughing, snapping pictures, talking loud enough for everyone to hear. Bryce wore a bright neon jacket with his name printed on the sleeve, sponsored by some sports brand I had only ever seen on store posters. He spotted me instantly and nudged his friend. "Look who showed up," he said. "I thought he would chicken out." His friend smirked. Maybe someone donated him a better pair of shoes. My cheeks burned, but I did not say anything. I never did. Words never mattered to people like them. Only status did. I moved away from them and found a small patch of grass to stretch. I tried to focus on my breathing, but my mind kept drifting back to the old man. His thin frame, his quiet smile, his bottle slipping from his hand. "Thank you, son." Such a simple sentence, but sometimes the simplest things stayed with you. The countdown to the race grew closer. Runners lined up at the starting gate. The announcer's voice echoed across the street. I slipped into my position far toward the back. The elite runners clustered together at the front, laughing confident. But a few rows ahead, I caught a glimpse of the old man again. He was standing near the barricade alone, camera in hand, watching the runners with a kind of focused intensity. It was strange. He did not look like he cared about the event itself. He looked like he was searching for something or someone. Maybe even me. Before I could make sense of it, the crowd surged, feet shifting, breaths sharpening anticipation, humming like electricity through the air. The horn had not blown yet, but everyone sensed it coming. The old man lifted his camera. Our eyes met one more time. Then he nodded just slightly, a gesture so small most people would have missed it. But I felt it echo inside me, as if he knew something I did not, as if he had been waiting for this moment. And then the horn blasted through the cold morning air. The race began and the old man vanished from my sight. I had no idea then that the stranger I helped pick up a bottle would become the person who changed the entire course of my life. But stories never reveal their turning points until you are standing right in the middle of them. The moment the starting horn sliced through the cold morning air, the entire pack of runners surged forward like a living wave. Bodies pressing tight, feet pounding against the asphalt in a rhythm that felt both chaotic and strangely unified. I was caught somewhere near the back, swallowed by the sheer energy of people who looked like they had prepared for this day. Their entire lives, runners whose shoes were so light and sleek they barely seemed to touch the ground. People with coaches shouting last-second reminders from the sidelines while someone stretched their calves or adjusted their hydration belts. I moved with them, but not like them. My steps were deliberate, cautious, the early stiffness in my legs reminding me that I had spent the past night stocking shelves at the grocery store and running home afterward instead of sleeping. Still, once I found my pace, something familiar settled into my bones, a rhythm that belonged to me alone. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth, the world narrowing into the sound of my heartbeat and the steady repetition of one foot after the other. For the first mile, people jostled me from all sides. A woman bumped my shoulder and didn't look back. A man cut me off, muttering under his breath about slow runners clogging the path. One volunteer shouted instructions but barely looked in my direction, waving his hand toward the elite pack ahead, as if the rest of us were simply background noise. I kept my eyes ahead, refusing to let the sting of those moments knock me off balance. But then I heard it, the voice I least wanted to hear. "Hey, Goodwill, try not to break those antique shoes before mile 5. Bryce." He ran past me with that same arrogant grin, the one that always made my stomach twist, with a mix of anger and resignation. His crew followed close behind, laughing loud enough for people nearby to glance my way with a combination of amusement and pity. One of them even pointed at me as if I were some kind of joke added to the entertainment of the morning. I ignored them, but the words stuck like burrs under my skin. After the crowd thinned slightly, I focused harder on my breathing. I punched through the early wall of nerves and let my mind drift into the rhythm I knew best. Step, breathe, step, breathe. It was not glamorous, but it was mine. Around mile 3, a volunteer held out cups of water. He grinned at the elite runners as they passed, shouting encouragement, but when I approached, the smile faded. He extended a cup reluctantly, barely meeting my eyes. I took it anyway. "Thank you." He nodded stiffly, already turning away. That familiar tightening in my chest returned the one that whispered, "You do not belong here." But I swallowed it and kept moving. Ahead, the course curved into a long stretch of residential streets lined with spectators. Children held signs with glitter letters cheering for runners they actually knew. Some clapped, some didn't. One older woman watched me with a puzzled expression, as if trying to figure out why someone like me was running alongside the others. I lifted my chin and kept going. By mile 5, my body began to warm up. The cold air no longer stung my lungs. My stride opened. The worn-out shoes, despite their thin soles, molded to my feet like old friends who had carried me through every hardship. I started passing people, not many at first, just a handful. A man who pushed too hard early, a woman who underestimated the hills, a teenager whose pace fell apart after the adrenaline wore off. I nodded respectfully when I passed them, even when they refused to look at me. The race became quieter inside my head. The noise of the crowd dimmed. The chatter faded, and I found myself drifting into a zone where nothing mattered beyond the next step. At mile 8, Bryce reappeared in my peripheral vision. He had slowed clearly, tired, but still ahead. He noticed me catching up and scoffed loudly. "Look at that! The charity case made it past mile 7. He pushed harder, trying to widen the gap, but I could tell he was burning fuel too fast. His breathing was sharp, his form sloppy, his shoulders curled forward. Meanwhile, I felt steady, grounded, almost calm. When I finally drew even with him, he gave me a look filled with disbelief and annoyance, as though my existence on the same course offended him. "Stay in your place," he muttered. I did not respond. I simply kept running. By mile 10, I left him behind completely. The course narrowed into a shaded trail, sunlight flickering through tree branches overhead like scattered gold. The ground was softer here with bits of gravel and patches of fallen leaves, and it reminded me of the places I used to run near the trailer park, the empty lots and cracked sidewalks where nobody cared enough to fix anything. But here, even in the peaceful quiet of the trail, my mind returned to reality. I was alone. Not alone like being unloved, but alone in the way a person feels when they carry the weight of a family's hopes on their back. Every breath reminded me of Maya's inhaler being empty. Every step echoed the sound of my mother crying at the kitchen table. Every ache in my legs mirrored the exhaustion in my father's eyes. I wanted to win. Not for the medal, not for bragging rights, but because people like us were never given reasons to believe we could. The trail opened into another street. Spectators cheered louder here. Strangely, some clapped for me even though they had no idea who I was. Maybe it was the way I ran. Maybe it was the determination they saw in my face. Maybe it was something else entirely. Around mile 12, the halfway marker came into view. Only then did I notice something unusual. Near the edge of the crowd stood the old man from registration camera hanging from his neck, hands steady now, eyes fixed on me. He did not cheer. He did not wave. He simply gave a single nod, a quiet acknowledgement. A silent, "You are supposed to be here." My chest tightened not from pain, but from something deeper that I could not name. The race was far from over. The hardest miles still lay ahead. But for the first time that morning, I felt something new rising inside me. Not anger, not desperation, something like belief. I straightened my posture, lifted my chin, and surged forward into the next mile, unaware that the real turning point of this race and my entire life was waiting just ahead. By the time I reached mile 14, the world around me had narrowed into nothing but breath and motion, a steady drumbeat in my chest that carried me forward even as my legs began to shake with fatigue. The sun had climbed high enough to sting the skin on the back of my neck, and the air along the river trail felt warmer than before, thick with humidity that clung to my clothes. Sweat soaked into the collar of my shirt and pooled at my temples, but I didn't slow. I couldn't. I kept repeating the same words inside my head, like a mantra that held my body together. Keep going, keep going, keep going. I was somewhere in the top 5 now, close enough to see the leaders whenever the course curved. Their strides were long and confident, the kind of form coached over years with access to things I had only ever seen on YouTube. The crowd lining the path grew larger and louder, with every mile their cheers blending into a distant roar that pushed me forward, even though none of it was for me, not yet. And then I saw her again. Sienna Warren, the girl everyone expected to win. She ran ahead of me with the kind of elegance that made her look untouchable, like someone who had never known struggle. Someone who trained with personal coaches and ate meals designed by nutritionists. Someone born into the world I had only ever watched through screens and storefront windows. But something was wrong. At first, it was subtle, just a slight sway in her shoulders and a slower cadence, a half-step hesitation that didn't match the rhythm she held earlier. Then her left arm began to hang loosely at her side, and I could see her right hand pressing against her ribs as if she were fighting through some hidden pain. A few runners nearby noticed it too, whispering under their breaths. "She's fading. She pushed too fast." One guy even laughed, shaking his head like her struggle was entertainment. But I kept watching her because something inside me whispered that what I was seeing wasn't just fatigue. Her posture tightened again, her breaths came out sharper, and for a moment she tried to accelerate. She stumbled, not a simple misstep, but a full falter of her entire body, as if her legs suddenly forgot how to hold her weight. My stomach dropped. She reached out for the wooden railing lining the park trail. Her fingers grazed it for half a second before she collapsed completely, her knees buckling inward, her shoulder hitting the dirt with a dull thud that cut through every other sound around me. Spectators gasped. A couple of runners swerved around her without stopping. One of them muttered something cold. She shouldn't have trained so hard for the cameras. My feet slowed on instinct before my brain even caught up. Ahead of Sienna, the trail curved toward a small medical station barely visible behind a row of trees. Only one medic stood outside, rummaging through supplies with a frantic pace, clearly unprepared for an emergency this early into the race. When he finally spotted Sienna on the ground, he shouted into his radio voice, trembling, "We've got a runner down. Possible heat exhaustion or collapse." "Backup." There was a pause, static crackling. The medic clenched his jaw. "You're kidding. They're still tied up with that car pileup near the west curve. I'm alone here." He grabbed a medical bag and sprinted toward her. I was only a few strides away. When I reached her, she was curled slightly on her side, gasping for air, her lips pale and cracked, sweat pouring down her forehead. She whispered something I couldn't understand. Her skin felt scorching hot when I knelt beside her. The medic dropped to the ground across from me, checking her pulse, shaking his head. "It's too fast. She's overheating. She needs to be moved now." He tried lifting her by the shoulders, but she slipped from his grip. He cursed under his breath. "I can't carry her alone." "Can you help?" I didn't hesitate. I slid my arms under her back and legs, lifting her slowly. Her head fell onto my shoulder, her breath shallow and uneven. My muscles screamed instantly, the exhaustion of 14 miles crashing into me in a wave of pain that shot through my thighs and calves. The medic grabbed her bag and ran beside me. "Keep her airway open. Keep her upright. Don't stop." I nodded, even though my knees shook violently. Each step felt like walking through mud with weights tied to my ankles. My arms burned. Sweat ran into my eyes. The path blurred slightly, the crowd's reactions echoing around me. Some gasped, some whispered. One voice behind me said, "Is he really stopping the race for her?" I didn't look back. The medic jogged ahead to prepare the bench at the station. I tightened my grip around her, whispering a soft, "It's okay. I've got you," even though I wasn't entirely sure I did. Halfway to the station, my right leg buckled. My knee hit the ground hard, sending a shot of pain up my hip. The spectators gasped again, but I didn't let her slip. I gritted my teeth, forced air into my lungs, and pushed myself back up. My arms trembled. My chest felt like it was being squeezed by a vice, but I kept going. Step, step, step. The medic met us at the station and guided me to lay her on the bench. He immediately opened cold packs, pressed them under her arms onto her neck, and lifted her legs to help blood flow. Her breathing steadied slightly, though her eyes remained half closed. The medic let out a shaky sigh. "You bought her time. You may have saved her life." I sank to my knees beside the bench, my breath ragged my arms, feeling like rubber. I stared at her face, at the girl who had everything I never had. The girl people cheered for, the girl I was supposed to be competing against. But in that moment, none of that mattered. She was just a person who needed help, a person who had collapsed alone. I stood slowly, forcing my legs to cooperate. The medic looked at me with confusion. "You're going back?" I nodded. "I have to finish, even if nobody cares why." Then I turned, legs wobbling, and started running again, unaware of how deeply this moment would ripple through my life. By the time the finish line appeared in the distance, my entire body felt disconnected from itself, like my legs were just two heavy beams of wood swinging forward only because momentum forced them to. The cheering crowd sounded muffled, as if I were listening through a thick wall, and every breath burned like gravel scraping down my throat. I could barely remember the last 2 miles. All I knew was that I had kept running one slow, dragging step after another, long after the adrenaline from helping Sienna had faded and left me hollow. When I crossed the line, the clock read a time that would have made me proud any other day. But not today. I staggered to the side, clutching my hips, drawing in air that didn't seem to reach my lungs. No one looked at me. They were all staring past me at the 3 runners standing on the podium, bright medals hanging around their necks like polished symbols of a world I wasn't allowed to enter. Volunteers rushed past me carrying water towels and electrolyte packs, not one stopping long enough to notice the way my legs shook. I reached for a cup of water from a table, and a volunteer accidentally knocked it out of my hand while grabbing one for a runner behind me. "Sorry," he murmured without really looking at me. I nodded, even though he was already gone. Moments later, I heard Bryce's voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Well, well, well. Look who didn't even crack the top 3. He smirked as he stepped closer, adjusting his expensive sunglasses. "What happened?" "Goodwill. Finally ran out of gas." I wiped sweat from my forehead, trying to ignore him, but he leaned in like he wanted to make sure I heard every word. "All that hype, and you still finished with the middle crowd. Guess those charity shoes didn't carry you far enough, huh?" His laughter mixed with a couple of chuckles from his teammates. I felt my jaw tighten, but before I could step away, a mother standing nearby shook her head and whispered loudly to her friend, "That boy should have stayed in his own division. I don't know why they let kids like him run with the elites." Someone else chimed in. "He probably pushed too hard, trying to show off." Kids from those trailer parks never pace themselves. Their voices hit me harder than the race did. They didn't know me. They didn't know what happened. They didn't know that I had carried a girl they all admired, that I had given up everything I'd trained for without thinking twice. All they saw was a boy who didn't fit their world, and they judged me before I even caught my breath. A reporter approached me holding a small mic with a station logo I recognized from local TV. "Hey, kid," she said quickly. "What happened? Looked like you were doing great early on. You cramp up near the end." I hesitated, unsure how to answer, and she took my silence as confirmation. "So it was stamina loss," she asked already, jotting something down. "Happens to a lot of untrained runners." "Don't feel bad." She walked away before I could speak. Stamina loss, untrained. Those words burned like acid in my chest. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to tell all of them. I wanted to say I didn't fail. I didn't fall behind. I chose to stop. I chose to help. I chose to carry someone else's daughter when she couldn't stand. But the words stayed trapped behind my teeth. I didn't know if saying it would change anything. I didn't know if anyone would care. I found Mr. Allen standing near the barricades, his arms-crossed eyes already searching my face with concern. He didn't smile, not right away. He just placed a hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. "What happened out there?" he asked quietly. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. For a moment, we just stood there while the cheers for the winners echoed behind us. Finally, I said. I stopped. His brows drew together slightly, and I added, "There was a girl. She collapsed. The medic needed help. His face softened instantly with understanding. "You did what was right, Jordan." I looked down at my shoes, the worn fabric dark with sweat and dirt. "People don't see it that way." Mr. Allen squeezed my shoulder. "They don't need to." "You know." I nodded, but it didn't stop the ache spreading through my chest. The finish line felt colder the longer I stood there, like the ground beneath my feet was reminding me that effort didn't always equal applause. For a moment, I wanted to disappear into the crowd to go home and never tell anyone I ran at all. But then I heard the announcer calling out the top finishers again, hyping up the names. Everyone knew the kids, with private coaches, tailored nutrition plans, and an entire team cheering for them. Not one person said my name. Not one wondered aloud whether something else had happened on the course. The truth stayed silent, swallowed by noise. The crowd began to thin as families gathered around their kids, wrapping them in towels and taking celebratory photos. I stood alone beside the track, breathing hard, sweat drying uncomfortably on my skin. Someone walked past me and muttered, "Fifth place is still good. Better luck next time." Another man added, "He should have finished strong if he wanted to impress scouts." I didn't respond. I didn't owe them an explanation, but God, it still hurt. It hurt in a way I hadn't expected, not because I lost a medal, but because nobody saw why. Nobody knew the weight of what I carried. Nobody cared. I felt invisible again the way I always did in the halls at school, in the grocery store, in every place where people saw the clothes I wore and the neighborhood I came from before they ever saw me. Mr. Allen finally said quietly, "Come on, kid, let's get you home." As I walked away from the finish line, I glanced back one last time. The podium gleamed in the afternoon sun. The cheers rose again for someone else, someone who had never stopped running. And I realized something in that moment. I didn't regret stopping, not for 1 second, but it still broke me that nobody knew why I did. I kept walking, no applause, no recognition, just the quiet truth sitting heavy inside me. 2 days after the marathon, life in the trailer park moved with the same tired rhythm as always, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if the race and everything inside it had been just another long day, instead of something that cracked open a part of me I didn't know was so fragile. The morning sun washed over rows of dented metal trailers, the gravel crunching under old pickup trucks heading to early shifts, the air full of frying oil from someone making breakfast on a skillet outside because their stove didn't work. I sat on the steps of our trailer, tying the same worn-out shoes I had cleaned the night before, out of habit, even though the mud stains refused to come out. My legs were still stiff. My arms still ached from carrying Sienna, but the real pain lived somewhere deeper, the kind that had nothing to do with muscle. I could still hear the whispers. Fifth place. Should have finished strong. Should have kept running. The world had already moved on from the moment that had changed my life, and I had no idea that in a few minutes the world would turn back around and find me. I was drinking the last bit of watered-down coffee when the sound hit first, deep and low, like thunder rolling across the gravel roads. People poked their heads out of their doors. A few kids dropped their basketball and ran toward the entrance of the park. Dogs barked. Birds scattered. I rose halfway from the step, squinting toward the main road, just as 3 black SUVs glided in like they were floating glossy and immaculate, so clean they looked out of place against the rusted mailboxes and sun-faded siding. Windows tinted, doors sealed tight. They didn't belong here. They didn't belong anywhere near us. For a terrifying second, I thought maybe the security guards from that night had tracked me down, still convinced I had tried to steal something, still believing I was trouble. My chest tightened, my fingers curled, but then the doors opened, slowly, deliberately, and the first person to step out was her, Sienna Warren. Her arm was still in a soft sling. She looked pale but steady, dressed in a simple sweatshirt and jeans, nothing like the elite runner I'd seen at the starting line. Behind her came a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine, tall, sharp suit, silver hair combed back neatly, the kind of posture that didn't bend for anyone. The air in the trailer park shifted. You could feel it. People moved closer, whispering. My mom stepped out from behind me, wiping her hands on her apron, confusion spreading across her face. My dad appeared from the side of the trailer, still in his mechanic uniform, a streak of grease on his cheek he didn't bother wiping off. My little sister tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Jordan, who are they?" I couldn't answer, because I didn't know. They walked toward us with a purpose that made my heartbeat thud in my ears. Gravel crunched under polished shoes. Sienna's eyes met mine first, soft and full of something I didn't understand: gratitude, vulnerability, recognition. Then the man stepped forward, and with one sentence, every sound in the trailer park seemed to vanish. "Are you Jordan Hale?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority, the kind that didn't need to shout. "Yes, sir," I said, my throat tight. He extended his hand. "I'm William Warren, Sienna's father." A breath got stuck in my chest. The billionaire. I didn't know his face, but I knew his name. Everyone did. The Warren Foundation funded half the youth sports programs in the state. They owned properties, tech investments, and companies I'd only seen on TV. And now he was standing in front of my dented trailer asking for me by name. "Sir," I managed, shaking his hand. He held my gaze for a long, steady moment before speaking again. "My daughter told me everything you did, every detail, every choice." His voice trembled just slightly on that last word. Sienna stepped closer, her eyes glistening. "You saved my life, Jordan." I shook my head instinctively. "No, You carried me," she said gently when I couldn't walk. "You didn't leave." Mr. Warren nodded, once the kind of nod a man gives when he has already made up his mind. "I don't believe in rewarding mediocrity or pitying anyone. I don't give out handouts. I invest in merit, character, integrity. And what you did out there—" His voice broke for a second before he swallowed hard and continued. "You carried my whole world in your arms. There are phrases that stick to your soul. That one did." My mother covered her mouth. My father shifted, trying and failing to hide the pride in his eyes. I felt heat rising in my face, a mix of disbelief and something close to fear. I didn't know what he was building toward until he said the next part. "Jordan, I'm offering you a full athletic scholarship, private training facility, gear, travel, nutrition, coaching, everything you need to build a future in running." My knees nearly buckled. Words swirled in my mind, but none found shape. He wasn't done. "And for your parents, if they're willing, I can provide openings at 2 of my regional businesses. Stable pay, benefits, a chance to breathe again." My mother gasped. My father blinked hard, jaw tightening in a way I had only seen when he was trying not to cry. I looked at Sienna, who gave me the smallest nod, like she was silently telling me it was real. Everything inside me felt light and unbearably heavy at the same time. I swallowed. "Sir, if I go, I want my coach to go too. Mr. Allen." He saw something in me when no one else did. Mr. Warren turned slowly, spotting Mr. Allen standing a few feet away near the curb, holding his old stopwatch, eyes wide with disbelief. "A man who believes in heart," Mr. Warren said. "Consider him invited as well." And just like that, the world shifted. Not because I won. Not because anyone cheered for me, but because when the moment came, I stopped. I helped. And someone finally saw the truth. I stood there frozen, surrounded by neighbors who had suddenly gone silent, as if the whole trailer park was holding its breath, waiting for my answer. Mr. Warren's words echoed in my head louder than the rumble of the SUVs behind him, louder than the ringing in my ears that still hadn't quieted since the race. A full athletic scholarship, private training facility, jobs for my parents, a life I had never even dared to imagine. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like something meant for someone like me. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My dad stepped forward, wiping his hands nervously on his mechanic pants, the disbelief still etched deep in his features. "Sir," he started, almost whispering, We don't know what to say." "You don't owe me anything," Mr. Warren replied sharply but kindly. "Your son earned this, every bit of it." My mom touched her throat like she needed to hold her breath in place to keep from crying. Sienna looked at me with a softness I had never seen from anyone outside my family, and as the world narrowed to just her eyes, I felt the weight of the moment settle onto me. I saved her life, and now her family was trying to save mine. But underneath all that gratitude pulsed a quieter truth. I didn't do it for a reward, and I didn't want anyone thinking I had. "Mr. Warren," I said carefully, my voice shaking. "I'm honored. Really. But I can't take this unless—" I paused, realizing how insane my next words might sound. "Unless Coach Allen comes with me." All eyes turned to the man still standing near the curb, clutching his stopwatch like it was the only thing keeping him steady. His face was pale eyes, wide mouth slightly open. The poor man looked like he might faint. "He believed in me first," I said, standing straighter. "Before anyone. Before even I believed in myself. If I get a chance, he should too." Mr. Warren let the silence stretch for a moment, studying me the way a businessman studies a contract, searching for the truth between the lines. Then he nodded slowly. "Anyone who sees potential where others see limits is someone worth having on my team." He turned to my coach. "Mr. Allen, how would you like to serve as a senior advisor at the facility? Not a charity role. A real position. Your judgment clearly changes lives." Mr. Allen's hand flew to his chest. "Sir, I don't even know what to say." "Then don't say anything yet," Mr. Warren replied. "Think on it. Good men deserve good opportunities, and good men are rare." My coach looked at me, and for a moment he wasn't the tired gym teacher with a thinning mustache and worn sneakers. He looked taller, younger, like life had just rewound 10 years and handed him back a dream that he thought had died quietly without anyone noticing. Meanwhile, neighbors gathered behind us, whispering, some in disbelief, some in awe, some simply trying to piece together how someone from our park could possibly be the center of something like this. I felt heat rising in my chest, a mixture of hope and fear. What if I failed at the facility? What if the other runners laughed at me the way they did at the marathon? What if I wasn't meant for anything beyond these gravel roads and broken steps? Mr. Warren must have seen the doubt in my face because he stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Let me be clear, Jordan. I'm not offering this because you're fast. Speed is common. Heart isn't. You didn't just stop running. You stopped choosing yourself over everything else. Most people never do that in their entire lives." My throat tightened. I didn't know how to tell him the truth. I hadn't stopped because I was noble. I had stopped because I couldn't watch someone suffer and pretend it wasn't happening. Because I knew what it meant to be ignored. Because I knew what it meant to need help and have no one look your way. My dad cleared his throat. "My boy works hard, sir. Harder than he should have to. If you're willing to give him a chance, he'll show you it wasn't a mistake." My mom nodded, tears on her cheeks. "We never had much. But Jordan always gave us more than we asked for. Always." It was the first time I had seen them both speak like that in front of strangers. It made my chest ache in a different way. Mr. Warren turned back to me. "So, Jordan, the offer stands. A scholarship, professional training, support for your family, guidance for your coach, but the choice is yours, not mine, not the world's, yours." I swallowed hard. Everything in my life had always been decided by necessity, by survival, by what we couldn't afford or couldn't risk losing. But this felt like the first real choice I had ever been handed, and I chose it. I lifted my chin, feeling the ground steady beneath me. "I accept." Sienna's shoulders relaxed with relief. My parents exhaled. Mr. Allen wiped his eyes discreetly. Mr. Warren nodded once, firm and proud. "Good. Then let's start building your future. But remember one thing, Jordan. You didn't earn this today. You earned it the moment you stopped running for yourself." He turned toward the SUV, opening the door for Sienna. "We'll send the formal arrangements by tomorrow morning. I'll have my assistant call you and we'll sort out the details." He paused before getting in. "And Jordan, my daughter is alive because of you. Do not ever underestimate the weight of that." Then he stepped inside, the engines hummed back to life, and the SUVs rolled out of the trailer park as smoothly as they had arrived, leaving a stunned silence behind them, a silence filled with possibility. a silence filled with the first breath of a new life, a silence I would remember forever. The first morning of my new life felt nothing like the movies. There was no triumphant music, no sunrise that looked brighter than usual, no dramatic montage. It was just me sitting on the edge of my thin mattress in the same small trailer, staring at my worn-out running shoes on the floor, wondering if stepping into a different world meant leaving everything I knew behind. My mom was already awake, humming in the kitchen as she made eggs, something we did not eat often unless it was a good week at work. My dad was fixing a loose cabinet door, pretending not to glance over at me every few seconds, like he was afraid I might disappear if he blinked too long. "You should eat," my mom said softly, her voice warm but trembling with everything she could not put into words. "Big day." I nodded, but the food tasted strange in my mouth, like my stomach had not caught up with my life yet. By 8:30, a black sedan pulled up outside our trailer. Not the SUVs from before, but still nicer than anything that had ever stopped on our road. The passenger's side door opened, and a tall woman in a navy blazer stepped out holding a clipboard. "Good morning. I am Elena, Mr. Warren's assistant. He asked me to escort you to the facility and help with onboarding." Onboarding. I had heard that word before. It belonged to people in offices, people who had job badges and computers and meetings, not people like me. Coach Allen arrived just a few minutes later wearing the only button-up shirt he owned and freshly shaved, though a small cut on his chin betrayed how nervous he was. "You ready, kid?" he asked. "Not really," I admitted. "But let's go before I change my mind." The drive to the training facility felt like a slow rise on a roller coaster, each mile pulling us further from the world I understood. The neighborhoods shifted. Trailer parks turned into tidy suburbs. Suburbs turned into gated communities. Then the gates opened into something else entirely. The Warren Athletic Institute was enormous, a campus instead of a building, all glass walls and steel beams and outdoor tracks that looked smoother than the floors inside our school's gym. Athletes in perfect gear jogged in synchronized warm-up drills. Coaches yelled instructions through high-tech microphones. Trainers with tablets shouted out lap times. My throat tightened. I did not belong here. Not even close. The moment I stepped out of the car, a group of teenagers near the entrance turned their heads. They did not stare openly. It was worse. They stared the way rich people stare when they are trying to figure out what brand you are wearing, but realize you are not wearing one at all. Elena guided us inside, explaining schedules, meal plans, dorm options, tutoring hours, the scholarship terms, the expectations. Everything sounded sharp, structured, polished. Then she turned to me with a small smile. "This place is demanding, Jordan, but you would not be here if Mr. Warren did not believe you can handle it." I knew what she meant. But belief from other people did not erase years of being told I was not enough, or years of being treated as background noise in someone else's world. The dining hall at the facility looked like something out of a college brochure. Bright lights, endless buffet lines, protein bars stacked neatly in rows. I picked up a tray and tried to blend in. A boy with perfect posture and expensive-looking running shoes walked by with two friends. I recognized him from online rankings. He glanced at me, smirked, and whispered just loud enough, "Guess they are letting charity cases in now." Coach Allen stepped forward before I could react. "Ignore it," he murmured, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You do not answer to noise. You answer to your work." Still, the humiliation stung. It always did. That afternoon, I had my first practice with the youth elite group. The coach was a tall woman with a firm voice and no patience for excuses. She watched me run a timed mile. My legs felt stiff. My breath felt uneven. Every lap, I could hear the whispers from the sidelines. Is he the one who saved that girl? Yeah. The runner who threw away the race. The poor kid. The nobody. By the time I finished the mile, my chest was burning. The coach studied her stopwatch, then me. "You have heart," she said, "and raw speed. But your form needs work, your endurance is inconsistent, and you carry tension like a backpack. We start fixing that tomorrow." I nodded, embarrassed but relieved. She had not dismissed me. She had not laughed. She had given me something I understood. Work. When practice ended, I saw Sienna standing near the fence, her arm still in a sling, but her posture confident. She gave a small wave. I hesitated before walking over. "You do not have to come watch me," I said awkwardly. She shrugged. "I wanted to see how you fit in." And she smiled gently. "You do not have to fit in on day one. You just have to show up." And you did. She paused, studying my face. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," I said. "Good. So am I." Something loosened in my chest. It was the first honest moment of the day. When I got back in the car to head home, exhaustion crashed over me. But underneath it all, something else began to grow. Not arrogance, not confidence, just a quiet thought I wasn't used to having. Maybe I do belong here, even if I have to earn it twice as hard as anyone else. Maybe this can be my new life. One step, 1 mile, one chance at a time. I did not learn the truth about Mr. Warren from him. I learned it the way most truths reveal themselves in this world, quietly and unexpectedly, like a door left half open. It happened on a Thursday evening about 3 weeks after I joined the facility. Practice had just ended, and the sun was sinking behind the tall glass buildings, painting everything in gold and shadow. I was stretching beside the track when I overheard 2 trainers talking near the equipment shed. Their voices were low, but not low enough. "I am telling you, one of them said he sees himself in that kid." The other laughed softly. "Who would have thought the billionaire with the private jet rooting for a boy from a trailer park?" Guess history repeats itself. I froze. History repeats itself. The phrase clung to me like burrs on my socks. When they walked away, I could not stop thinking about it. I gathered my things and headed inside, but instead of going to the locker room, I walked down the quiet hallway toward the administrative wing. I was not sure what I expected to find. I only knew that since the day he stepped into my neighborhood, I had felt something about Mr. Warren I could not explain. A weight behind his eyes, a familiarity in the way he watched me run. The administrative wing was mostly empty that time of day. I passed rows of framed photos of elite athletes and newspaper clippings about the Institute's achievements. Then one frame stopped me cold. It was an old black and white photograph. A young man standing on a dirt track, thin, dark-skinned like me, wearing a pair of beat-up running shoes held together with tape. His smile was small but determined. Beneath it was the caption, "Anthony Warren State Champion in 1978. My heart slammed once against my ribs. Warren, not a coincidence. I stepped closer, studying his face. The eyes were the same, the jawline, the tension around the mouth like he was holding back a lifetime of things unsaid. This man had been poor, not kind of poor, not used to be poor, really poor. Someone who had lived a life like mine before his name became a symbol of wealth. I stood there for a long moment, my breath shallow. When I finally turned, I spotted another photo on the opposite wall. This one showed the same man in an old newspaper clipping holding a trophy with his arm around a woman with curly hair. The headline read, "Small Town Runner Becomes National Hope After Tragic Rescue at Regional Tournament." Rescue! My fingertips pressed unconsciously against the glass. A third frame showed a different moment. A grainy image of a collapsed runner being carried by a young Anthony Warren while medics rushed beside him. The caption said, "Local teen sacrifices win to save competitor's life." My knees went weak. I sat down on the bench in the hallway, the cold air hitting the back of my neck like a warning. He had done it too. He had been in the same moment, the same decision that I had faced, winning or saving someone, spotlight or humanity. The realization felt like a punch and a hug at the same time. I do not know how long I sat there before footsteps approached. I looked up and found Mr. Warren himself standing over me holding 2 cups of hot tea. He did not look surprised to see me there. If anything, he looked like he had been expecting this moment. "I thought you might wander down here eventually," he said, handing me one of the cups. I held it, letting the heat steady my shaking hands. "Why didn't you tell me I asked?" He sat beside me, stretching his sore leg the way older runners do, slow and careful. "Because it was not about me," he said quietly. "It was about you, and what you chose to do when no one was watching." I looked at the photo again, my voice tight. You were me. Once. He exhaled and nodded. Poor, invisible, running on broken shoes, helping my mom clean motel rooms at night, going hungry so my little brother could eat. I understood all of it, Jordan. Every part of your life before the race is a life I have lived. I stared at him, the truth settling heavy in the space between us. And the girl you saved, I said slowly. Who was she? His jaw tensed. Her name was Elise. She was my closest competitor, but she was also my closest friend. When she collapsed, the crowd didn't see it. They were too far ahead. The medics were late. I could have won the state championship that day, but instead I carried her 300 yards to the medic tent. My throat tightened. What happened to her? She lived, he said softly. His voice changed, thickening with something deep and old. And a year later, she became my wife. I had no words. He closed his eyes briefly before continuing. She died 8 years ago. Cancer. She made me promise one thing before she passed. He paused, his hands tightening around the cup. To never forget where I came from, to honor the kind of heart that saved her, and to help someone with that same heart when the time came. My breath caught, so when I carried Sienna, his voice cracked just slightly. When you carried my daughter, he whispered, you carried the last piece of the woman I loved. I felt something in my chest break wide open, not from pain, from understanding, from connection, from the realization that I had stepped into a story much bigger than my own. He placed a hand on my shoulder. You think I helped you because you are talented, Jordan, but talent is everywhere. Heart is not. You have the same heart I had when I was 17. And my wife believed someday someone like you would come along. I lowered my head, overwhelmed. I am not a hero, I said quietly. I am just a kid who stopped. He smiled, eyes warm with something I finally recognized. Pride. That is exactly what a hero would say. The day I understood what full circle truly meant did not arrive with applause or trophies or reporters waiting at the finish line. It came quietly, the way most of life's most important moments do, slipping into the ordinary without warning. It was a late Saturday morning in early spring, the kind where the cold still clings to the air, but the sun promises something warmer. I had just finished my interval training at the facility, sweat cooling on my back as I walked the familiar path toward the old community track behind my former school. I went there once a month now, partly because Mr. Allen insisted I should never forget where I came from, and partly because a part of me still needed the reminder. The track was cracked, the bleachers rusted, and the field was patchy with uneven grass. It looked exactly like the place I had once run alone in the dark because I had nowhere else to train. As I approached, I saw a group of kids running awkward laps, their arms flailing their shoes, mismatched their laughter loud and careless. They reminded me of myself, and also nothing like myself. I had not laughed while running when I was their age. Running had been survival. But then I noticed one kid standing apart near the fence, small, thin, shoulders pulled inward, too quiet. His clothes were hand-me-downs that had already been through several lives before reaching him. His laces were 2 different colors, his socks didn't match, and he was staring at the track like it was a place built for other people. I walked over, swallowing the lump in my throat. You want to run too? I asked. He shrugged, staring at the ground. I can't. Why not? He hesitated before whispering, I don't have shoes that fit. I looked down. His shoes were so small his toes curled inside, holes on both sides, the same kind of shoes that had once left my feet bleeding, the same kind of shame I had carried silently for years. I slowly knelt and set my training bag on the ground. When I unzipped it, my hands brushed against a shoebox wrapped in a towel. The shoebox that held the most valuable thing I owned, not the new racing shoes the facility had given me, not the state-of-the-art gear, but the old, worn-down pair Mr. Allen had given me during the early days of my training. The same shoes that had carried me across the marathon course through poverty, through humiliation, through the moment I lifted Sienna off the ground. They were my past, my pain, my pride, and my proof. I opened the box slowly, and the boy's eyes widened like he was witnessing something sacred. They are not new, I told him gently, but they will take you somewhere. He looked up at me with a mix of disbelief and hope that hit me harder than any race I had ever run. "Are you sure?" he whispered. I nodded. "Someone once believed I deserved a chance too. Now it is your turn." He reached out and took the shoes with hands that trembled just enough to break my heart. He sat on the ground, slipping off his too small pair and sliding into mine. They were big, but not too big, the kind of big that meant he had room to grow. Mr. Allen watched everything from a distance near the bleachers, his arms folded and his expression soft in a way only he could manage. When the boy stood, his posture changed. His shoulders lifted, his eyes lifted. He looked taller, stronger, like someone had just handed him permission to try. "Go on," I said. "Give me one lap." He took off awkwardly at first, legs, stiff arms too tight. But then something happened around the curve. His feet found a rhythm. His strides lengthened, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked free. I felt my chest tighten with something warm but also painfully familiar. It was the same feeling I had when I ran my first real lap. The same feeling I had when I crossed the finish line in 5th place, carrying the weight of a choice no one saw. The same feeling I had when Mr. Warren stood in front of my trailer and said my name like it mattered. When the boy finished the lap panting hard, he looked at me with eyes shining. "I can do it," he said breathlessly. "I can really run." "Yes," I said softly. "You can, and you will." As he ran back to join the others, I walked toward the bleachers where Mr. Allen waited. His smile was small knowing. "Full circle," he said. I shook my head slightly. "No," I murmured. "Just the next lap." He chuckled. "That sounds like something you should hang on to." The wind swept across the field, lifting loose gravel and tiny seeds into the air. In the distance, I could hear the boys' laughter mixing with the others. It echoed something inside me that had long been quiet. When I left the track, I took the long way home, passing through my old neighborhood. Some of the trailers were still dented, some fences still leaned. But that day, it didn't look like a place I had escaped. It looked like a place that had shaped me, a place that had built a runner out of broken things. When I reached home, my little sister ran out to greet me, inhaler in her pocket, but her smile bright and fearless. My parents stood on the porch holding hands, something they had not done in years. They looked tired, but not in the hopeless way they used to. They looked tired in the way people do when life is finally possible. That night, as the sun sank over the neighborhood and painted the world orange, I sat on the steps and watched the sky. I thought about the marathon, about Sienna, about the moment I chose to stop instead of win. I thought about Mr. Warren's story and Elise and the promise that had carried all the way to my door. And I realized then that life is not measured by the trophies we chase, but by the people we lift when no one is looking, by the choices we make when the world expects us to keep running, by the laps we continue even when the track disappears beneath us. As the first stars appeared in the sky, I whispered to myself, not as a runner, not as a kid who used to be invisible, but as someone finally aware of the path ahead. This is not the end. It never was. It is only the next lap. There are moments in life that do not come with applause cameras or cheering crowds. They come quietly in the spaces where no one is watching, where character reveals itself without asking for anything in return. Jordan's story is one of those moments, and if it touched you, it is because somewhere in your life, you have lived a version of it. Maybe you were underestimated. Maybe you were spoken to like you were small. Maybe you were standing at a crossroad where doing the right thing cost you something you could not afford to lose. And still, you chose kindness. You chose humanity. You chose to care when it would have been easier to walk away. The world rarely stops for moments like that. It rarely says thank you. More often, it moves on loud and impatient while quiet people make brave choices that change everything. That is why stories like this matter, because they remind us that goodness does not need a spotlight to be real, and compassion does not need an audience to count. Jordan did not win a medal, but what he won was harder to earn and harder to forget. He gave up a victory for a girl he barely knew, not because it was easy, not because it made him look good, but because it was the right thing to do. And maybe that is what all of us are craving today. Proof that character still exists. Proof that people still stop. Proof that in a world obsessed with winning, someone is still willing to slow down for another human being. If Jordan's story made your chest tighten, or your eyes sting, or reminded you of someone who once helped you when you needed it most, then stay with us. This channel was made for people who believe that kindness still matters, for people who understand that the strongest hearts are often found in the quietest lives, for people who know that doing the right thing is not weakness but courage in its purest form. And if you are here listening, feeling something in your chest right now, then you are part of this light too. We share these stories not because they are perfect, but because they are true in the way that human hearts are true. They remind us of who we can be on our best days. They remind us that dignity is not old-fashioned, that compassion is not soft, that stopping for someone who has fallen behind is not a failure, but a victory that lasts longer than any race. And maybe, whether you realize it or not, you have your own version of Jordan's moment, something you did, or something someone did for you that changed the way you saw the world. If so, let it stay with you. Let it remind you that the world becomes better, not through grand gestures, but through small choices repeated by ordinary people who refuse to give up on goodness. And if this story reached you, if it opened something inside you, then do one thing for us, for yourself, for the next person who needs a moment of hope. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might lift your day or soften your heart when the world feels harsh. Because together, when we share these stories, we are not just watching a video. We are reminding each other that we are still capable of grace. We are choosing to hold on to the belief that one act of kindness can echo farther than we ever expect. And just like Jordan discovered, sometimes the smallest choice becomes the beginning of everything. Stay with us. There are more stories coming, more moments that heal, more reminders that even in the hardest places, light always finds a way through.